I'm Mrs. Shiley. Today we're going to talk about procedures and expectations when we use watercolors. I'm really excited about this year with watercolors. I decided to do a video only because I think we can go back to this and review some ideas that we've learned or I haven't thought of before. Usually, as you guys know, in the past, our classroom's kind of set up with jobs. I like to get everyone working. This is a typical table size, and we usually have 5 kids sitting at a table. So as my kids know, usually 5 jobs. So if we were to do watercolors, one of the jobs would be water, maybe a second job would be paint brushes, another job would be actually getting the paint, the watercolors. Another one would be a visual aid maybe that they would have to get. Sometimes I like using their visual aids. Now, they're not painting flowers or anything, but this is something of a visual aid that they would put in the middle of their table that they could all see it. And the last but not least, who cannot love their last job, which is usually cleanup crew. For me, and it seems to work best for me, is just simply taking a sponge and wiping down the table. I know there's been other procedures like we learned about with Johanna Russell, where she would take a water bottle and spray down and the kids would wipe it. For me, I personally think sponging is half the fun about cleaning up, and whatever table cleans up first usually gets in line, which is a big hit for me. Well, with our jobs, let's talk about our watercolors that we're going to use and some paintbrushes, our procedures, okay? One thing that I usually did in the past was I asked the kids to get 3 sets of watercolors. I would have my kids that sit on bottoms number 1 and 2 share a set, bottom number 3 and 4 share a set, and the kids that sit in the back happen to luck out and get their own. Well, what I learned with this is maybe changing things up this year and giving the kids paints that are not in our trays like we would normally, and start with maybe doing warm colors. Putting warm colors on a tray, 2 for each kid so they can all reach it, and they use the watercolors with it. Now, one thing that we also have learned about with watercolors is that the watercolors don't work unless we wake them up, which we'll go back and revisit in a second with using our paintbrushes. So I do like that idea that we learned about with Mrs. Russell about the pan paints, of maybe just starting with the warm and introducing the cold. Another thing that we talk about sometimes is using watercolors. The watercolors that are liquid. Now, I like using the pans, and why I would use the pans for this case is because I would put a set of warm colors and cold colors. Now, something I want to show you before we even talk about the liquid paints is how I personally get my watercolor paints. I like just using a jar, which is kind of cool to see. I use markers. So if I were to use, and I wanted water liquid colors, I take old markers. Now, this is half the fun, is the kids seeing this. Take the caps off and you just put it in the jar. And when I put it in the jar, you want to see how all that just drains out. It takes a little while, maybe an hour or so, where this will get really blue. Obviously, the longer you keep it in, the more it gets drained. Once this gets drained, then I like using coffee containers that I fill up with the paint that's already inside it. We can all use the watercolors, which is wonderful. Sometimes even storing them maybe in an old container like this would be a great use. I even have baby jars, glass jars. I know I'm dating myself. Plastic ones, make sure you get the lids, another way to store them. Obviously, a mason jar could work. We even learned again also with Mrs. Russell about using the little containers and using a little that had water in it, eyedropper to use it. Now, if we ever use an eyedropper, I know my kids would want to explore, and that's half the fun. Let's make some room here. So if you were to explore, you could splat it out and you move it around. That would be a fun way to explore with the watercolors. I know, I'm totally running out of room here. Let's go back to how we would also make these pans, because we have liquid and we have pans. If we had the pans and we were to use them, we have a variety of paintbrushes, okay? How I use my paintbrushes a lot of times for the kids is I have them demonstrate. We have a big K on here. It's usually my kindergarten brushes, use the big fat ones. This one is, a 6, so I would have my 6s in here and my skinny brushes. As I look through these, you can totally tell some of my brushes are totally damaged. You can also tell something that we learned about is the wooden part of them. I do agree. I usually get a big container and I tell the kids to drop it in a pitcher. Let's pretend this is my pitcher since I didn't get it. And I call them that's my hot tub. And usually I rinse them out. But some days, yeah, it doesn't take me as quick to rinse the paintbrushes, and I totally agree that the paint falls off. Plastic ones are better, but we still have to show the kids how to use our paintbrushes. This one is definitely on its way out. So something that I thought was interesting that we learned in that class was having the kids clean the paintbrushes. I know I said about using how to wake up our paintbrushes. So once again, if we were to wake up our paintbrushes, we were, Casey Stevens is another great blogger who takes her water and she says wake them up, but you put a little water in each little container, and by putting a little water in them, that's how they actually wake up or activate the color use. I love that term, waking up the paint. So once we show the kids how to wake up the paint, they can actually use the paint to paint, which is fantastic. Now, something we want to talk about though is how they even clean them up. When they clean, I usually, like I said, I told the kids to drop it in the hot tub and I washed it. But this year I think I'm going to change it up, making them rinse it using a sponge and drying it off. Then before them putting it in, because sometimes they don't leave the tips up, which was a very handy dandy poster I used to have up, talking no wacky hairdos with their paintbrushes, because no one likes a wacky hairdo. And then usually like, wacky hairdo, no one wants that. It's always fun to do with kindergarten. Anyways, so maybe it's something that I learned is instead of them drying it on a paint sponge, is laying them flat. Then it could dry better, and then I can easily place it back in the end of the day. I think that might be a better trick that I might use. Another trick that I learned was having them store like a little big popsicle stand, leaving that on here. So if they paint and they clean off their paintbrush and they add it, okay, and they paint and they want to change their color, drying it off on the actual sponge before they get their next color, which I love that idea. Something that I also like to add, and I don't know if you can really see great, is sometimes kids get upset if someone mixes the color. You're always going to have what I call a turkey, which means a kid that didn't follow directions and clean it. They're my turkey kids. So what an expression I like to use is use a car wash. Just like if there's some bird, you know what, on your car, you have to clean it off. So I use the expression of cleaning off that top layer just with water. As they clean that top layer off with water, it's like magic. They get that nice pretty orange that they need. They can use their sponge and dry it off and get going on painting again. I think these are wonderful skills that we can try to incorporate this year with our pans, doing warm and cold instead of getting a whole thing at one time. Using the sponge to dry it off. Who doesn't want to carry the sponge like this with a cool little popsicle stand? Also using not the hot tub this year, then being responsible for cleaning it off and leaving it in a dry console. These are some procedures that I think have been a wonderful thing that we're going to try to incorporate this year. Last but not least is when your paper is wet, remember when you take it to the drying rack that you hold it nice and flat and you slide it in where it properly goes. All right, thank you friends. I'm looking forward to seeing wonderful paintings. Look at the blue, it's awesome.